Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Master of Orion. It's technically the fourth game in the series, but we don't talk much about the third one, and for good reason. I'll explain why in a minute. But, by an entirely different studio, it could be considered a bit of a reboot. I think that's a fair assessment. It's by Wargaming Labs and NGD Studios. The NGD Studios folks not really responsible for a huge amount of significant stuff prior to this. They made a whole bunch of Heroes, which was not a 4X space strategy, so not really relevant to this. And of course Wargaming, who apparently has infinite money, thanks to World of Tanks, putting in a significant amount of effort into this, and budget-wise, this game certainly costs a little bit. They dragged in some fairly famous voice actors, the production value is very high, and I imagine there was a deliberate reason for that, and I'll talk a little bit about why I feel that high-budget, great voice acting and production value approach is a good idea when rebooting a venerated franchise. That's always a minefield when you do that. The game Master of Orion 2, Battle at Antares, was considered to be one of the best 4X of all time, certainly one of the godfathers of the space 4X genre, and is rarely outdone. There are plenty of imitators, but few of them really seem to capture the magic of Master of Orion 2, and a lot of that magic came down to the fact that, for the time, in particular, it had a pretty slick interface, which is a big problem for a lot of older DOS titles. They were designed with very little regard to sensible user interface and quality of life features, which makes a lot of those games far more difficult to play these days. You know, you go back and play the old XCOM, for instance, something like Terror from the Deep, and you'll notice that there is so much that could be done there to improve the game in terms of its UI and the ease of getting things done. You know, there's too many clicks to do one particular thing, the user interface is fiddly and obtuse. Master of Orion 2, surprisingly, even to this day, was surprisingly awesome to play. Very slick and really nicely presented interface as well, very thematic, and it had this awesome B-movie-like feel to it. It was colorful, it had an almost timeless aesthetic, and the races that you encountered were very memorable, as well as, of course, things like space dragons and giant amoeba. It evoked memories of older sci-fi, as well as, of course, the original series of Star Trek. It had all the features that you could really want from a 4X strategy game, so when Master of Orion 3 came along and basically ruined everything, people were not particularly happy. It took the iconic game that was full of character and flavor, listened to a few complaints about it, and then decided, instead of making minor tweaks and alterations to improve the formula, to take those problems and completely go far too far in the other direction. One of the criticisms of Master of Orion 2, especially later on in the game, was the micromanagement required for both large-scale colony management, once you had a lot of systems, and, of course, the combat, which was turn-based, which early on in the game was fine, and it was tactical, and it was enjoyable. And then, of course, once you got larger fleets, it became an insufferable nightmare. Now, Master of Orion 3 decided to go down the real-time combat route, which this game does too, by the way, and that's a matter of controversy and debate that I'll talk about a little bit later. But Master of Orion 3 bored the living hell out of people by changing the colorful battlefields to these awful wireframe wastes of time. You know, there's barely any control available. It was essentially just send Fleet A against Fleet B and watch what happens, and it wasn't even entertaining to watch what happened because you were watching these green wireframes as opposed to colorful ships and rip-offs of Death Stars and Star Destroyers and so on and so forth going at each other. Not to mention the fact that it took the micromanagement complaint and basically made the game play itself, which wasn't great. You know, it was focused more on macro management of empires, but it was done via an almost spreadsheet-like interface. It was a very boring game to look at, and as I said, it automated far too much and could effectively play itself. It was a game mostly about manipulating sliders rather than actually controlling a space empire. Had a lot of problems, a lot of people didn't like it, and rightfully so, and the franchise disappeared from our radars for 10 plus years. So, what does the latest reboot offer? Well, alright, let's dive into the options menu first before we get through some race creation and some gameplay. I have some late game to show you that was played on hard mode. I did a playthrough on normal and, well, kind of crushed it, so I restarted the game on hard to see whether or not that made it any trickier, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that later. But first things first, options menu. Not really a lot to discuss here in terms of graphics options. I mean, it is a strategy game. It's not a first-person shooter. You don't expect a huge selection there, but it would be nice to know exactly what these presets even mean. Now, I don't really like presets when you don't have a custom option that breaks down what this actually entails, so you're just going to be guessing here. AA is available up to 8 times, couldn't tell you what type. VSync on or off, and full screen on or off. That's pretty much it. You don't need all that many graphics options in a strategy game, but it would be nice for it to be a little bit more descriptive than this. These mean nothing. Alright, moving on to gameplay. So you got a few quality of life features. You can disable the GNN, that's the Galactic News Network. That was a big part of Master of Orion 2, really added to the theme and the atmosphere. But it can get annoying and a bit repetitive after a while, so you might want to leave it on for the first couple of playthroughs, then turn it off. Advisor tips, you can mute your advisor entirely. You might want to do that at some point. Some of the voice acting can be a little bit grating, depends on which race you happen to be playing. Auto turn, do love this option, this is nice. So basically if there's nothing that requires your attention, it'll keep ticking the turns over, and that speeds the game up significantly. Thankfully, I will say that in the overall galactic view, turn times are very quick. There's no waiting around for the other factions to take their turns. It's processed very fast, even in late game with large empires, which I was quite impressed by. Certain other space RTS, no, space 4X strategy games, let's try that one again, have suffered from massive slowdown in the late game, which means turns can take a long time to tick over. Not the case here. Happy about that. Tactical combat options. Start the battles on pause, that's always nice to have. A couple of starting camera modes, as well as pause camera modes, and you can enable what's called Admiral AI by default, which will make the battles a lot easier in terms of the control. It takes some of the control away from you, but I personally like to keep full control, so I have that turned off. And you can also set up your ships in a particular formation prior to the fight if you so desire. Separate audio sliders for everything. Controls, hotkeys available. You really don't need any of these, but it's nice to have them anyway, so kind of appreciate that they have that. No real complaints there. Also, you can control the game via a gamepad. I can't imagine you want to do that, but you can do it if you want. And Tobai eye tracking is available. That will be interesting to try. Interface. Okay, a few interface options here. Not too many. Subtitles on or off. Fast animation, always nice to speed things up. Show numeric damage. So, some people like to see damage numbers pop up, some people don't. And a couple of different health bar options for the ship. So, I like the inclusion of that. Something that StarCraft has in it that's very nice. So, you can turn it on or off. Have it so that it only pops up when you select the ship or only when the ship has been damaged. So it keeps a little bit of a clutter away from the battle. Outside of that, retro fleets is an option on or off, basically pixelates everything, and that is really about it. There are probably a few more quality of life features that could be added in here in future, but otherwise, you know, there's not really a lot to complain about there. Alright, so creating your own custom race, as well as the selection of races, is a big deal within Master of Orion. So we're going to have a look at how that's done, and the selection of races available, and then we'll jump into the gameplay. So let us begin with some race creation. Alright, if we head over to New Game, we can see the selection of races available, and unfortunately the narrator will not shut up as I move around here, so I apologize for that. I don't know why there is no option to shut him up during this process, but each of the races has a little backstory that's explained by the narrator, and they all, of course, have different characteristics. Most of the races from Master of Orion 1 and 2 are here. There's a couple missing. Also, I believe there's the addition of a second Terran faction, which is the Evil Terran. You can tell by the inexplicable need for some sort of rebreather there, as well as the Evil Stance. So you can play Good Human, Evil Human, whichever you prefer. And was there designed a little bit differently. All of these are actually really well modeled. They invoke the art style of Master of Orion 2, and they really represent a lot of these iconic races quite well. A couple of redesigns that I am not so keen on personally, like I don't necessarily like what they did with the Darlock there. I think the Meklar could be a little bit better, but I mean they all still look good. They're just maybe not what I remember from 10-15 years ago, and that's all personal preference. But the Cylon look very similar. I love what they did with the Klakon there. Mercian have this nice stance to them as well, you know. Animating all of this really added a nice little bit of character flair to the different races, and I appreciate that. Again, high production value is the name of the game here, And I think when, you are remaking something like Master of Orion, which is iconic and is considered to be one of the greatest of all time in the genre, you do have to pay particular care and attention to this sort of thing if you're doing a modern remake. So I do appreciate that. All right, custom race design. So you can pick a basis, which is going to make your race look like, say, the Daleks or the Bulrathi, so you can use their ship types and all sorts of things like that. That's purely cosmetic. You can also even pick a name for your leader, if you so desire. And now you've got some points that you can distribute to various places. Now, this is for the most part quite similar to the way that Master of Orion 2 did its design. There are a couple of new special abilities here and there, since there is a system called Uber Planets. My understanding of that is that certain races have the ability to develop their planet into an ultimate paradise, something that they would really like to live on, and that's added in there. So say if you're a plains dweller, your Uber planet would be grassland. I don't believe those planets by default exist. You've got to create them. So you've got to find something that's close, and then you've got to research a technology and actually improve the planet to be your ideal world, which is a cool little idea. Outside of that, you're going to see a lot of stuff that was here in the first place. So a lot of these abilities are very, very similar or indeed identical to the way that they worked in Master of Orion 2, so you can mess around a lot here. What I did notice is that it's possible to actually break the game in this process. So I created a race that was really heavy on production. I wanted to create a giant homeworld that I could really create a production powerhouse on. And I set it up so that I could do that. I thought, right, okay, I'll get like huge home worlds. I can increase the production I get from my population by 50%. There we go. I can put something on my home world that'll make things better. Like, say, for instance, I can increase its mineral wealth. And I made my creatures lava breathers, because I thought that would be amusing. So what happened was, after I'd set all of this up and I started the game, it started me on this huge planet that was high gravity for some reason, which halved all of my production capabilities, which basically gimped my starting world completely. The technology you need to fix that comes much later in the game. Oh, and also, it starts you on a lava planet. Turns out you can't actually farm on a lava planet, so my race immediately starved to death. It's like, what? How is it even possible to create a race that literally cannot function? I don't know, but that is possible. They may want to do something about that. So I wouldn't mess around with this until you've got a bit of a handle on the game after your first few goes, and then you can customize things. But yes, that whole process was bizarre, to say the least. I don't really have too many problems with this. I think it includes a good selection of things to play around with, so I appreciate that. It would be quite nice if some of these tooltips were a little bit, say, better explained. Oh, expansionist. You know, what does that mean? You know, they tend to be aggressive in border disputes over recently settled lands and so on and so forth. Now, for you, that's not relevant. This will determine some of the behavior of the AI. So if we head on back here and we go to, say, Bulrathi, you'll notice there isn't really anything that would affect them there. But if we head over to something like, say, the Sakra, they're expansionist. So they're likely to be highly aggressive about settling new worlds. So that's interesting. Apparently they start with engineering and biology. It would be nice to know exactly what that entails. For instance, I don't know off the top of my head what those technologies do. So it would be nice if that was included in the tooltip. And then you've got things like uncreative, where it says technology uncreative. What does that mean? What could you explain that? As I think these tooltips are insufficient. In fact, one of the key problems I actually have with this version of the game is that it lacks information on a number of different topics that currently I had to dig around the forums to find out info on. This game lacks, say, a Civilopedia or Master of Orionpedia or whatever, basically an in-game help system or manual, which means that a lot of the game remains a mystery, and it can be a little bit more difficult to figure out what's the best course of action as a direct result or how certain mechanics work. I think that when you're creating a 4X strategy game, you have to make sure that all of those mechanics are very transparent and well explained. And while the game's tutorial is solid, no doubt about it, tells you how to set everything up, you shouldn't have any problems learning the basics of the game. It's just learning the advanced stuff in the game is effectively a mystery, and a lot of it will require trial and error gameplay. And I imagine that as people figure things out, we're going to learn a lot more going forward. Alright, so not too bad. It would be nice if the other couple of races were there. I think the selection is pretty solid, honestly. Each race has their own set of ships. Each race has a bunch of different custom responses, and each race, of course, acts very differently and has its own separate kind of AI. So, it's just fine. I don't really mind so much that a couple of races are missing. It would be nice to see them added later down the line, even if it has to be little pieces of DLC. People do love the Master of Orion races, and anything that's missing, well, it would be nice to see that come back. Cool. All right, so I'll also show you galaxy setup here. Very important to know how this works. You have 3 types of galaxies: circle, spiral, and cluster. That's going to affect the shape of the galaxy, as well as 4 different galaxy sizes. Starting galaxy ages. This basically determines the kind of stars you're going to encounter, which generally affects the biomes of the planets. So, say a younger galaxy is more likely to find volcanic planets that are still in formation, and so on and so forth. You've got 3 different starting ages: pre-warp, post-warp, and advanced. Post-warp is the default start. That means you can move between stars. That's about it. If you really want to start pre-warp, you can do, but it is going to slow your game down. And advanced is nice if you've played a couple of games where you started at post-warp and you just want an accelerated start. This is nice, because it starts you with a basic fleet. It starts you with some of the basic technologies that are really required to kickstart your colonies. And if you don't have those techs, colony development can be tediously slow. Difficulty levels. Now, this is where things get a little bit weird, because I started on normal thinking, okay, you know, I'm a fairly experienced 4X player, but I'm certainly not incredible at them. So I started on normal thinking that would be fine, especially considering there's 2 difficulty levels below this. I played an entire game through on normal with the classic settings. At no point was I ever threatened. Just didn't happen. The AI completely ignored me for the most part. The only war that happened was one that I declared. At no point did the AI ever try to exploit the fact that I was busy fighting halfway across the galaxy and maybe declare war on me and attack me from a different angle and exploit the fact that most of my fleet was out of the way. No, they just sat there and let it happen, which I found to be a little bit irritating. I mean, I basically won that game and got bored before the end of it because there was no challenge to it. So I started a new game, ramped it up to hard, and hoped that I'd deal with some more aggressive AI. I'm not. I'm still dealing with AI that can keep up with me, absolutely. AI that have as large an empire or larger and are trying to keep up with me on a tech level. But there's just certain issues in terms of the AI ever trying to force you to do something, make demands, or declare war, or interact with you in an aggressive fashion. Maybe I've just got unlucky, but, you know, this is after 22 hours of play. How many more sessions do I have to play to figure out whether or not I just happen to have 2 big lucky sessions where my AI decided not to mess with me? One way or the other, if your AI doesn't mess with you, the game ends up being a little bit dull as a direct result, because you never feel threatened at any point. So you might have to crank it up, especially if you're experienced. Game pace. Always nice to have this. You can even have a custom game pace here if you go to advanced settings, so you could speed up your research, production speed, all that kind of thing. So if you want a really slow game, you can do that. You want a really fast game, you can do that. I like that level of customization. That's awesome. And you also have different victory types. By default, by the way, 500 max turns is turned on. If you're like me and don't want your game to suddenly end, I'd turn that off. And then you have a couple of different victories: diplomatic, technological, and economic. The whole hunt down the Anterans victory, that's not there. Orion is still there as the ultimate planet, and of course it still has its guardian, so you can build up to take that, but there's no Antaran invasions, there's no endgame scenario involving anything like that, a more powerful trans-dimensional force, which is disappointing, actually. I'd like to see those introduced, because the lack of minor races, as well as the anemic power of the pirates in this game, mean that there is no third-party threat, which does make the game a little bit less interesting. Cool. All right, so that's pretty much all the information you really need about setup. I'm not going to talk about multiplayer, because frankly, playing a turn-based game in multiplayer is never something I've been interested in. What I will say is that tactical battles are disabled in multiplayer, meaning everything is auto-resolve. So if you do want to play it in multiplayer and you do like your tactical battles, well, they're not going to be there. So bear that in mind. Okay, I'm going to jump into a fairly late-game campaign. This is on hard mode. And I'm going to show you some endgame tech, I'm going to show you some combat, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I like, as well as a couple of the problems that I have with the way that the game is set up, and things that I feel are missing. Because while this is a relatively complete package, there are certainly things that are conspicuous by their absence, which would absolutely improve the game by significant amounts. All right, let's jump into the game and talk a little bit about Master of Orion. All right, welcome to Master of Orion. In yellow is my empire. Yeah, it's getting a little big, actually. I'm doing pretty well. This is my hard mode game. This is towards the end game. I'm a few technologies away, I think, from finishing the tech tree entirely. I have some nasty-looking ships, some big-looking guns. I even have a Doomstar wandering around, which I have yet to have a chance to play with, so we're going to experiment with it during this video, and I'm going to hopefully enjoy every second of doing so. Alright, so first things first. UI. Pretty nice, actually. Clean. Maybe not as stylized as Master of Orion 2 was. You know, I did love the fact that it felt like I was sitting in an actual control room, controlling my space empire with nice big buttons and LEDs and lovely things everywhere. This does not have that, but it does have a clean and functional and quick UI that gives you rapid access to all the information you could really desire. A lot of clear, obvious, clean icons that are not obfuscated by any nonsense. It's not a busy UI. It shows you everything that you need and little more, and I'm pretty much okay with this. Moving in and out of the galaxy view is extremely easy. You just roll your mouse, and you can see the entire galaxy on one screen, which makes things a lot easier to navigate. Outside of that, we can jump on in and have a little bit of a look at the planetary view here. You'll see that the structures are represented on the surface of the planet, which is nice. Some great animations there as well, showing ships buzzing all over the place. You know, it definitely feels like the planet is genuinely alive and is developed. The larger planets tend to have more cityscapes and more obvious ship traffic, whereas the smaller planets that are not as populated are certainly more sparse. If you want to see the structure list, you can actually look at this, which is quite nice. You generally don't need to be here. I actually have never come across a scenario where I've wanted to look at the list of structures on a planet, which is why it's quite nice that it isn't there all the time. It's something that you're going to have to use so infrequently, they decided to just tuck it away behind the menu. So you got to admit that that was actually pretty smart. You could even click the individual buildings if you like to find out a little bit more information. Is that necessary? No. Is it nice to have? Sure, why not? And that is my main homeworld right there. If we jump back here, you'll see that the lovely little individual, I'm going to call them meeples, which is a little bit of a board game reference. The little individual population units are represented visually, and you could pick one up, it'll even dangle around there and drop them. Or alternatively, I could grab half of that and put it in there. This was a classic part of Master of Orion 2. It's a great piece of visual representation, gives you at a glance an idea of what each planet is doing, and it's very, very easy and quick to change the focus of any planet between research, food, and production. I'm glad that they kept this. Again, it is kind of iconic, and each of these little icons looks great. I love the fact that we have birds in little farmer dungarees with pitchforks. You can get one in a hard hat with a jackhammer there if you so desire. And even if they happen to be on strike for whatever reason, they'll have a little sign next to them and they'll be sitting down in protest. It's those little touches that make for a Master of Orion game. It's those little touches that were all completely lacking in Master of Orion 3, which made it a characterless husk of a sequel. So I'm glad that they included that. In terms of building, it's all very, very simple. What you're going to notice here is that this is very, very similar to the way that Master of Orion 2 did almost everything. And that's deliberate. The game is an obvious reboot. It is not attempting to reinvent the title. It is attempting to update it and bring it to the modern age, which has its advantages as well as its disadvantages. You can build pretty much anything from this screen right here. You also, in some cases, have the option to build more than one ship at a time. Smaller ships, usually, I believe, up to the destroyer class, can be built in blocks of 5. Now you might ask, well, why would you want to do this? Well, in late game, you can often have so much production that you overproduce what is required to build one ship. So it's actually inefficient. You end up wasting an awful lot of production points because you can only build one ship at a time. So if you're building 5 at a time, that ceases to be an issue. The problem is that only seems to work for frigates and destroyers. You can't even use it for things like troop transports, which are very, very cheap and can be extremely easy to build in one turn. I mean, for God's sake, I have no one working production on this planet, and it'll only take 3 turns to build a troop transport. If I even dump a couple of people into production, then you'll probably notice that troop transports take like 1 turn or 2 turns to build or whatever. They're 1 turn. Why can't I build a pack of 5 of these at a time? I don't know. It's one of the curious little omissions that I find in this title that could be very easily fixed. It would be nice to see the ability to build those packs of smaller ships extended to things like troop transports or civil transports, for instance. These in particular are a giant micro-heavy pain in the arse that I'll talk about a little bit later. Outside of that, you can set your colony focus. What that's going to do is it's going to automatically move your little meeples around quickly. So if you don't want to drag them all over, which to be fair is incredibly quick anyway, you just hold down control and drag a whole bunch of them at once. But you can do that. It also has auto build available. And I'm not sure if the colony focus affects the auto build. I don't believe it does. I think it just sort of builds what it feels is necessary. But you can also queue up to 5 buildings here as well. So production is really, really simple. It's very easy to do. There's not a great deal lacking here. The only thing that seems to be conspicuous by its absence is planetary governors. That's something that was available in Master of Orion 2. You could actually hire these governors, which would come and work, and they give bonuses for different planets, and you could also set governors to focus on particular goals for your planet. I don't know why they're not here. Like, that seems like a fairly significant feature to leave out. Hopefully that'll be something that they bring in future, because it was nice to have very specialized planets with a governor that would really buff up the ability of that planet to do what it was supposed to be doing to the best of its ability. So yeah, skipping between colonies, really, really easy. Auto build is something you'll probably end up using a lot later on, honestly, because once you have as many planets as I do, you don't want to be individually managing them. That's not a particularly fun thing to do. However, let's talk about an element of individual management that is a pain in the arse, and that is relocating population. So every time that you take a planet in this game, usually with a colony ship, it will start with 1 population, and once you have a couple of technologies, it will also start with a couple of basic buildings, which is helpful to kickstart it. The problem is, before that, it starts with absolutely nothing. The problem with that is that actually getting a colony started and growing, really difficult to do with only 1 population unit, because you can either get food, so that, you know, you don't starve to death, and you can actually grow, and the more food you get, the faster your population grows, or you can put it into production, so you can actually build something. So you can be sitting there unable to build the damn thing while you slowly wait for the population to grow, and it means that developing new planets is a real pain in the arse. Now, they did come up with a way around this, which was the so-called civil transport. Now, this is what a civil transport is. Basically, what it'll do is, once it's built, it'll automatically pick up a population unit from the place that it was built on, and then you could fly it over and then unload it onto that planet. This has to be done individually, 1 at a time, and there is no automation in it whatsoever. That is infuriating. Not to mention the fact that, as I said, they're pretty cheap, and especially in the later game where you probably want to build several at once, you can't. You've got to do it 1 at a time. That means every single turn, out pops a transport saying, new fleet ready for orders, and you've got to move it over to whatever planet you want it to go to, and then once it gets there, you've got to manually unload it, and over and over and over, and ooh. That is something that could have required, in fact, it does require, in my opinion, a degree of automation. Look, I get it. They don't want to go as far as Master of Orion 3 did. They don't want to automate absolutely everything. But that is one really annoying and unrewarding mechanic that I feel could be automated. You could set, say, a rally point for auto unload. Maybe instead of just having these disposable ships, you could have a freighter that would move backwards and forwards between a planet. And you could set up a route. It's like pick up here, drop off here. So you didn't have to micromanage all of that. Especially towards the mid-game, that population ferrying becomes extremely time-consuming. Late game doesn't matter so much, because there are a couple of really cool technologies that allow you to, say, share food within a system or export production, and also later game colony ships are equipped with the ability to automatically build certain structures at the start. So that makes it much, much easier to establish a colony quickly. But until you get those technologies, establishing new colonies, especially at a fairly rapid rate, is tedious. So I would like to see that changed. Alright, so that's how you set up colonies. Not a great deal to worry about there. Now, there might be something that you noticed here, which was not in Master of Orion 2. Star lanes. So in Master of Orion 2, you could travel pretty much anywhere as long as you had the fuel to do it. Fuel is not a factor in this game. You can keep flying as far as you want, but you can only move via star lanes. Or jump gates, but, you know, they're not really relevant right now. We'll talk about those later. So, the stars are connected by various lanes. Most of them you could just travel freely. There are a couple of star lanes which are considered unstable. Usually these pop up at harder difficulties, and you need a piece of technology to access that. So it means that some systems actually remain untouched until later in the game, which is nice, because finding an uncolonized system in the late game is nigh on impossible, and racing for that technology to unlock those systems and potentially find some really high-quality planets in them is really cool. The problem is, sometimes it just doesn't give you any. Like, this galaxy generated with 0 unstable star lanes, despite the fact that I'm on hard difficulty, so none of the worlds were inaccessible, and outside of that, you can just pretty much fly anywhere you want, as long as you don't fly into an enemy fleet or battle station. Now, I don't mind star lanes. There's a couple of advantages to star lanes over the Master of Orion 2 movement system, but there are also some disadvantages. The most obvious advantage is that you can create choke points, which mean that fleets have to attack from a logical direction, and they can't just come out of frickin' nowhere. That means that you can create front lines, you can fortify your most important strategic worlds. And as you can see here, I have military outposts on all 3 of these star lanes because I'm quite close to an empire that I don't really trust. I'm at war with the Bulrathi right now, and the Darlock are a bit bigger than me, and they haven't shown any signs of aggression yet, but I don't bloody trust them. These are also ideal for stopping pirate attacks, which can be annoying early on in the game, but are utterly anemic and worthless later. In fact, there's no pirates even left. They all got wiped out. Their pirate homeworlds were destroyed very easily. The pirates feel like a missed opportunity. There's only a couple of different types of pirate ship, and they're really only a problem really, really early in the game, because they can come and, like, destroy a colony ship, which is a massive disadvantage. Like, hell, if you lose a colony ship early in the game to a pirate, you might as well restart the game, because those are huge investments. Or your space factory, which builds these structures, can be destroyed, or a scout can be destroyed by them. And, of course, they can bombard worlds and blockade them as well. But they generally only come in 1s and 2s, and they're really weak technologically. So as long as you have a ship to guard your planet or the end of a star lane, you're not going to worry about them. Missed opportunity, in my opinion. Like I said, there's really no third-party threat in this game. There are no minor races in this version of Master of Orion, and there are no Anterans, the trans-dimensional beings from the first one, which would come and invade you late game and had a bunch of unique technology. They were really scary. Every now and again, there'll be a space eel or a space dragon pop up, but usually it just sits around in the system and doesn't do anything. So it's fairly rare to see them. I think in this entire game, I've only seen like 4 space monsters, and they never threatened me. So again, I think that those things could be expanded upon, and I think they should be expanded upon, because keeping you busy is a priority in a 4X game, and unfortunately this game does lack in the event departments. There are some events that happen, like maybe a star is about to go supernova, or one of your planets will suddenly get upgraded in terms of its mineral classification or whatever, but there aren't many events. There's far fewer than Master of Orion 2 had, and that could certainly be expanded a great deal. Those events, again, gave the game flavor and also gave you a constant set of unexpected challenges to deal with, which was great when the AI was sitting around not doing anything. You know, so it's like, oh god, I've got a plague here, I've got to deal with that. Instead of having to constantly fight these different empires in order to have something interesting to do. I feel like I skipped over the star lanes bit a little bit too much there. As I said, I think the fact that there are choke points and the ability to fortify systems is a good thing, but it also means that all the technology involved in increasing fuel capacity and all that sort of thing, that's all stripped out of the tech tree now, so the game has less technology than Master of Orion 2 did, which seems a little unnecessary. You can view it as taking away a layer of the game. I think it's very subjective as to whether or not star lanes or no star lanes in a fuel system is best. I don't mind the star lanes, personally. I don't have any particular attachment to that fuel system. I don't feel that it really added a great deal to the game. Although the ability to fly anywhere on the map without any fuel restrictions does mean that I think expansion can be a lot faster than perhaps it should be, as well as accessing other parts of the galaxy. It seems to me like you can explore the galaxy way faster than previous games unless you get a huge galaxy start. So maybe they want to slow that down a bit in some way, without, of course, the unstable star lane mechanic, which doesn't even appear in half of the maps that you play. Alright. So what else do you actually do in this game? Well, of course, there's a diplomacy system. You can jump in right here, and it shows a nice little visual representation of everything. 2 of these races were destroyed. Sorry, humans. You know, I was protecting them for a long time, and then they decided to spy on me, so their one homeworld, I just bombed it into oblivion. So I'm currently at war with the Bullrathi. They're a little annoyed with me right now. I'm at peace with the Darlocks, however. We can have an audience with the Darlocks. It's all nicely animated. Has its own little piece of theme music there. So, negotiation-wise, you have a bunch of different treaties that you can enact. What interested me is some of these treaties actually cost money. Now, I think that's an interesting idea because treaty spam was an issue and is an issue in a lot of different 4X games. You just get friendly with a race and then you spam every treaty you possibly can because it's like, hey, free money. Hey, free research. Actually, no, not anymore. These are not free benefits. You have to actually be able to afford them. If you want to keep doing research treaties, you've got to pay for it, and that scales throughout the game. Same with trade treaties as well, so it actually makes you think about who you want to have a trade treaty with. So I actually like that. I think that's a nice little addition, because diplomacy in those games tended to boil down to butter up the opponent so they're friendly to you, and then just get every treaty in the world immediately and do it over and over again. Because there was no downside to it. I like the fact that there's actually potential downsides. There's costs to this kind of thing now. So that's pretty cool. Outside of that, you can trade whatever technology you want. There's also a what do you want for this option, which is pretty great. What would make this work? For instance, I want an alliance, you know. Can I have an alliance with you? Okay. Apparently, you've decided you're not going to talk to me. That's weird. I've never seen that happen before. Oh, there we go. It decided, no, it's not going to do that. But usually, this is nice, say, if you have a piece of technology to sell, you can ask, hey, you know, what would you offer for this or whatever, and then you can negotiate the deal and tweak it and see if you can get the most out of it. So I found the diplomacy fairly engaging. The main problem I have with it is the AI doesn't seem to want to engage in it all that often. 90% of the interactions that I had with the AI were done because I started them. They never really ask for anything. They don't seem to threaten. Every now and again, they'll pop up and say, hey, I've got a piece of tech. You want to trade this tech for that tech or whatever? Especially true if you discover a really cool piece of tech that's very desirable. But for the most part, I found that diplomacy wasn't actually that common. It wasn't happening all that often. And the system seems to work, certainly. It's just the AI seems apathetic to its existence. I'm not really sure why that is. It would be nice to have the AI be a little bit more engaged in it so I didn't have to be the one that was proactive all the time in the relationship. Alright, there's an espionage system. I am not massively impressed by this, and it does become a real pain in the ass later on. So what happens is you get a piece of technology that lets you build an espionage center. You can only build one of them, and that center will spawn spies on a regular basis. Those spies you can then send out to a world, and then you've got a bunch of different options. So let's say, for instance, I assign a colony world. I want to send the spy over here to Raben 5. I can do that. It'll take a couple of turns to head over there, and then you have a couple of different missions you can take part in. Usually you have to acquire data initially to unlock the next, and then you can infiltrate a part of their economy, and then your final mission is usually something that will do some damage. You can steal something, you can stop research generation, you can cause a worker strike, you can even cause a revolt on the planet. Some of these feel really impactful, some of them don't. The main problem is, especially when you get a lot of spies, they have to be micromanaged, and constantly sending them out to different planets and then telling them to go on a mission or whatever can be irritating. It would be nice if some of this could be automated to some degree. Especially when you get so many spies, it seems like every turn it's like, oh, you have a new spy, better send him out, and then you've got to find a world that you don't have a spy on. It's like, oh god, well I've got 12 spies in the Bullrathi Empire, I've got to find a world that I don't have a spy on, so I've got to go and do that. So it's fine enough, like it's good that it's there. I think that it could do with a few more interesting missions. Most of them are actually fairly dull. They lack a little bit of flavor, and some of them you'll feel like don't really have much of an impact at all. It's like, oh, I can stop this planet's research for 10 turns. Like, all right. I mean, is that really going to make too much of a difference? I think you have to make a concerted effort to do that across multiple planets in order for it to really make any difference. The one that I like the most is Revolt, because it usually involves a planet leaving the control of the Empire for 20 turns, and then you can just go and invade it, and usually that's very, very easy to do. So I think that's fairly impactful, but it would be nice to see maybe another tier of missions that were really awesome and destructive, like the ability to steal a ship or blow something like that up or whatever. It's fine enough, it just, again, feels like it could do a little bit more flavor. Alright, ship design. That's a factor, isn't it? So, I do love designing ships. I really do. So, can you tell me why there are only 8 blueprint slots at maximum tech capacity? Because I love designing different ships with different functions. And I don't have enough space to do that. That's the main problem. So I've stopped using frigates and destroyers entirely in the late game. I'm using cruisers, battleships, titans, and I have a Doomstar here as well. I can actually just delete this because you're only allowed 1 Doomstar. It's a nice little change, actually. I quite like that. The Doomstar is the ultimate ship. Huge thing. I mean, you can look at what I've equipped it with. Banks and banks of weapons. It has 60-point defense phasers. I have like over 100 heavy-mounted enveloping auto-firing ion cannons, all split into groups so they can target multiple things. 20 Mauler devices, as well as a lot of tech. Shield capacitors, heavy armor. I mean, this thing is a beast. I'm going to play with it in a minute so you can see how it works there. The ship design is fairly similar to the way that it was done in Master of Orion 2. I can't quite remember. Did Master of Orion 2 have weapon arcs? Because this game bloody well doesn't. All of the weapons are either forward-firing or omnidirectional. So you can't have a ship that is set up for broadsides or whatever, which I found to be a little bit disappointing, and I think that's actually a missed opportunity with the real-time tactical combat. Outside of that, you've got a bunch of different slots for specials, which are determined by the ship size. There's a lot of specials you can add here as well. You know, a lot of different pieces of tech and a good amount of customization, so you can specialize the ship to be good at particular things. I mean, hell, there's the Stellar Converter, which is a giant super weapon, which will blow up planets. There's a lot of stuff to play around with here. And I found the ship design to be fairly compelling and reasonably engaging. The one thing that I would like is for there to be more obvious distinctions in the technology. Because it seems like a lot of this tech is just better versions of the previous. Like, proton torpedoes versus antimatter torpedoes versus plasma torpedoes, they do the same thing. And I can understand, hey, you know, this technology is a lot cheaper, so maybe you want to build some cheap ships with some older tech on it. But what would be nice is to see different effects on it, for instance. You know, instead of having the phasers just be a better version of the fusion beam or whatever, or the laser cannon, have them each have a special effect, which really distinguished it from the previous, or indeed allowed those technologies to remain viable. There is a degree of that, because you can, through research, miniaturize and make cheaper a lot of this older tech. So, you know, adding laser cannons is super cheap now, and they're still fairly effective point defense weapons, and they're really small too. You know, compared to a phaser, which is over 3 times the size and takes 12 times as much production. So I might experiment a little bit more with using older technology to maybe just make much, much cheaper ships in bulk. But it would definitely be nice to see a little bit more variety there. But weapons-wise, you know, there's quite a few, and most of the old weapons, including some of the weirdest stuff, is available here from Master of Orion 2. The biggest problems I've got, again, are the fact that there are only 8 maximum blueprint slots, and you don't even get them all at the start of the game. There's no reason for that. Like, why? What's the point in limiting that? Unlimited blueprints would be much, much, much better. You know, I'm having to be seriously picky about what I do here. I don't even have space for destroyers and frigates, so I don't even build them anymore, because I've got all of these Titan variants and all that, and a couple of battleship variants to worry about. So I need to see that fixed. And also, look, if you're gonna let me name my ships, can I have more than 12 characters as a limit? I mean, what the hell is that? Really? I want to name some super fancy thing, and I can't do that. Why is there a character limit? There's no reason for that. These are all really easy fixes, which I hope get patched in later, but they are currently annoyances, without a doubt, that really impede the enjoyment of the game, because I love tinkering, I love designing ships, and the game decided to arbitrarily limit my ability to do that, and it can go to hell as a direct result. What I do like is that the game has an auto upgrade system, which works very well. So if you're researching technology and like, oh god, I've got to update all my ship designs, you can actually do it automatically. And for the most part, it gets it right. Every now and again, it'll screw with your carefully planned out ship design. It's like, oh, I carefully balanced all of my technologies so that I filled the hull capacity exactly. And then you click upgrade and it's like, oh, it's ruined everything. But it very, very rarely does that. And I also appreciate all of this information really being available at a glance. Like, hey, how many hull points does this Doomstar have? The answer is a hell of a lot. It's absolute beast. We're looking forward to taking that into combat. It's going to happen. Don't worry. I said I'd do it, and I will absolutely do it at the end of this video. So I am pointing out a few flaws here, but I want to point out that most of these flaws are pretty damn minor and easy to fix. Does the game have any key debilitating problems? In my opinion, no, it actually doesn't. I think most of what's been done here is well realized and works, and it works fairly well. There are just elements of it that could be better. There are basic parts of the game which could do with being fleshed out. The solid groundwork on pretty much every system in this game. I can't point to a single system that I don't like. It's just some of them have nagging flaws, or some of them just are a little bit too shallow and could do with a little bit extra, a little bit of pizzazz. I think that that's going to happen when you have a game that sits in early access for as long as this one does. What's the right time to release? Who knows? You know, this could have sat in early access for a year more features be added, and I hope that they are added, you know, because I think what they've released here is a really, really solid start. And it's a very playable game. It's one of the easier 4X strategy games to play. It's very accessible. It's very intuitive. There is some depth to the systems, but you're not going to get drowned in it. It's not a very intimidating game. And I think that was always the strength of Master of Orion versus more complex 4S space games. That it was just easy to pick up and play, but you learned a lot more as you went along. However, there is a big piece of controversy that we're going to talk about, and that is real-time combat. Should we take the Doomstar in? Well, so this is the remains of the Terran Empire that decided to start a fight with me. Bad idea. I've almost crushed them. They had half the galaxy at one point. I took them out. I have much better technology. That is a fleet of 6 ships. I believe it's probably backed up, most likely, anyway, by a starbase. A couple of destroyers, cruisers, some frigates. And that is my Doomstar. I'm only allowed one of them. I just love the fact that it rotates as I move around. It's a nice little piece of detail there. I only have one of them. We're going to see what happens when we throw the Doomstar up against what's left of the Terran Empire's fleet. I can't wait. This is not going to last very long. Now, the real-time combat. This is a very divisive element of the game. Some people absolutely hate it. I'm actually going to defend it. I think it's better than Master of Orion 2's combat. And I'll explain why. Let's get into some fighting. A starbase, a cruiser, 3 destroyers, and 2 frigates versus the Doomstar 3. I do not expect the Terran to survive. Alright, let's take command, and that is the Doomstar. You get a lovely little cinematic intro to all of the fights, which actually shows the ships in formation slowly flying out. Again, it's one of those nice little pieces of production value that are really well polished in this version of Master of Orion. Like, things like the cinematics are really high quality, the voice acting's really high quality. Everything is kind of polished to a mirror sheen when it comes to the visual aspect of it. I appreciate that. Hey, Doomstar! The Doomstar's bigger than the Starbase, for God's sake. And the amount of guns this thing... I mean, this has like 200 weapons on it. I can't wait to see what happens here. So, the real-time combat starts paused. And usually you have the ability to set formations. These are actually pretty cool because they actually do make a difference. They affect the statistics of the ships. So if you have a bunch of ships that are of a similar type, they can be put into a formation. So you can, say, set wedge formation, which gives you speed and beam accuracy. A circle formation is a very defensive formation. So, and you can do this dynamically too. So if you've got a wave of missiles incoming on you, you can switch your fleet to a circle formation so the point defense accuracy goes up and you're better at taking the missiles out. That's a really cool little element. You can also set optimal minimum and maximum engagement ranges, as well as change the throttle of the ship. So you can even slow certain ships down to make sure that everybody gets to the same place at the same time. There's also a match speed function. These are all really nice little elements that I'm happy with. Ceasefire available and all that sort of thing. This is all pretty damn cool. We're going to open fire? I think we're going to open fire, aren't we? In order to explain this, I'm going to slow this down to as slow as it'll go. 0.25% speed. Alright, here we go. That is a lot of guns, and that is going to be one very, very dead starbase very, very quickly. I also have a Mauler device here, so I want to really get in close and see whether they just annihilated it. This tiny little missile comes in and is immediately going to get shot down by my point defense weapons. Alright, now I can start moving the Doomstar towards that tiny little pathetic fleet of theirs. I'll speed it up a little bit here. So, the problem that I mentioned earlier about Master of Orion 2's combat is that late game, this became an absolute waste of time. Because it was turn-based. And it meant you have to move each individual ship and fire each individual weapon, and with large fleets, it took forever! And it was insufferable. A lot of the time, you just want to auto-resolve it as a direct result. And I hate auto-resolving combat, because you can never trust it to do the right thing. Goodbye, Terran Empire fleet. Oh, that was not good for them at all. Goodbye. You get a nice little summary at the end to see how much damage was done and, you know, what your best weapons were and all that sort of thing. Earlier on in the game, in Master of Orion 2, the tactical combat was good, because you can make some real decisions, you had different items that you could use at specific times, and it was tactical, no doubt. But later in the game, it became a mess, a time-consuming mess. I prefer real-time combat to that, because you can engage with massive fleets, and that won't happen. In fact, we're going to try and engage with a massive fleet. I do have... My fleet's currently in repairs over there, but we can head over there. There's a larger fleet there that we can fight. I have a few Titans. It's a bit bashed up after my previous fight, but I can send it in. There we go. We'll send it on the way and choose production over here so we can skip forward. We're just going to put that on auto build, I think. I don't really want to manage that right now. I think real-time combat works very, very well, and there's actually a lot of potential in the real-time combat in this game because of the different use of formations, and controlling the different ships and actually microing the ships has an effect. That's great. That's phenomenal. I love that. The problem is the fights are over too quickly. I think if you increase the toughness of all of the ships and made the fights last longer, then tactical maneuvering would be a much bigger deal. Also, of course, since there are only omnidirectional and forward firing arcs, tactical maneuvering is not quite as important. Yeah, you've got to maneuver your ships so they're facing the enemy, but that's really about it. And I'd love to see a huge difference in the maneuverability of certain ships. Yes, the smaller ships generally go faster, but turning speed is pretty quick for all ships, which means that trying to outmaneuver a larger ship is essentially pointless, because you won't be able to do it. So if they adjusted the turning ratios of the larger ships and also made everything tougher so the fights lasted longer, then there would be more micro potential and more potential to truly control your fleet and have more satisfying battles. As it stands... Oh, screw it. We're gonna blow this up. I don't care. I'm declaring war on these guys. We're going for it. There's 28 ships here. We've got it. The Doomstar's gotta get its day. Come on. Here we go. We're declaring war on the Darlock just so the Doomstar can blow up this entire fleet. Watch this animation. I absolutely love how these guys fly in. It's like, you guys are screwed. Oh, wow. I can't wait. Here we go. Doomstar, off you go. Mush mush. You go and cause them a few problems, shall you? Yes. I'm surprised this fleet doesn't try and get out of there. I'll just speed it up. The basis of the real-time combat is fine. Again, it's just a little bit too fast. Even if, obviously, you slow it down. Make things tougher. I mean, hell, it's even possible, especially in the early game, to maneuver small ships behind asteroids to block incoming missile fire. That's really cool, except you never do it. You know, you generally just click in the vague direction of the fleet. I mean, obviously this is the Doomstar, you don't have to micro this much, but you just click in the general direction of the fleet, and for the most part, the ships are just going to sit there and fire at each other. That's pointless. There's so much potential with this system, they just need to tweak a few aspects of it. I mean, hell, this could probably be fixed with modding, honestly. Half of that fleet just got blown to bits. I love it. Oh, the Dalek are probably going to murder me now. I imagine they have some pretty high-tech stuff. So I don't mind it. I think real-time combat's pretty solid. It's just more could be done with it. That's the story of this game right now. What you have is a really, really solid foundation. And for the most part, pretty much everything in this game is good. Now, it plays quickly. You don't have to wait at all, really, for turns to tick over, which is wonderful. There's a decent amount of automation that could do with maybe being just a little bit more. I'd say particularly in terms of moving the bloody population around. That's a pain in the ass. But later in the game, there's a nice little system whereby you can set up, I believe it's called a interplanetary something or other. Interplanetary administration. Which means that what that's going to do is it distributes spare food to the entire system, and it also means you can use these smaller planets to export production to the other planet, which is awesome, because that means that it encourages taking over all the planets in a system, even if they're suboptimal planets, which you didn't really want to do previous to that. So you could set up these planets as feeder planets for a much bigger planet, and you can turn it into a production hub using that export feature. And it also means that the colonies grow much faster because that spare food is being distributed. The problem is it's inter-system only, and it's quite a late piece of technology, unless you pursue it deliberately quite early on. It's good, you know, it's a well-designed little system, but those aspects like moving the population around early on in the game are annoying, and they're not very well conceived, in my honest opinion. The combat could be a bit better. The espionage could be a bit better. The AI could be a little bit better. All of those things, you know, there's room for improvement. But, you know, the good news is, as far as I'm concerned, this is all entirely patchable. And this is all something that could be fleshed out either through modding or DLC. So I think that what they've really managed to do here is actually capture the essence of Master of Orion 2. And for the most part, their reboot is a success. There are just these little pieces here and there. There are just these systems which are not quite as good as they could be. But I see potential, you know. Hopefully in 6 months to a year, this could very well be... Ooh, it's going to be a battle station versus battleships. This is probably not going to go well for me. I should have upgraded that to a huge starbase, but we'll see how that one goes. I've annoyed the Bullrathi. I don't know how they got there, actually. But we'll see how well my battle station does. It's pretty well upgraded. It has a decent amount of weapons. I don't know if it's got enough, but hey, here we go. We'll take the cruiser out first. Ooh. We do have a missile base as well, so we can unleash a cavalcade of fury upon them. Cry havoc! Let's slip the dogs of war. That is a lot of torpedoes coming my way. This is going to get real ugly real fast. In 6 months to a year, this will probably be the best Master of Orion game that's ever been made. Well, add in more events. Have the galaxy be more interesting. Add in third-party and minor races. Oh, maybe bring the Anterans back. Have a really difficult endgame objective. All that sort of thing. These are all things that can be done. Not without too much... And I can't imagine they'll require too much effort either. They're all achievable. They're all feasible. They're all things that will probably arrive at some point, either through modding or official support. If you've never played Master of Orion before, or indeed you've never played 4X before, this is actually a pretty damn good entry point. As I said, it's easy to learn, tutorial's good, there's a couple of systems here and there that I'd certainly like to see improved. And there's a bit more transparency that is really needed to be added, like, say, for instance, you know, an in-game manual or some kind of encyclopedia. But it's a pretty decent effort, actually. I'd even say, you know, it's a good effort. It's a good 4X game. Not as complicated as some of the other stuff on the market by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a good 4X game in its own right. And I think that it does a great job of honoring the legacy of a series that went to hell with the release of Master of Orion 3. I think that's maybe the best thing to really point out about it, is that this series was dead for a long time, a very long time. And what we've got here is a well-polished and really, for the most part, well-designed, high production value reboot of that game. That is what I was looking for, actually. It really was. That is what I was looking for with this. So, for the most part, I could pretty much recommend Master of Orion. Just needs a little bit extra on top. A little bit extra polish. Play it on a harder difficulty, certainly. But not too bad at all. I was expecting disappointment, and I didn't get it, and it's always nice for that to happen, really, isn't it? Master of Orion, ladies and gentlemen, currently available for $50 or your regional equivalent on Steam. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. Should we blow up something else? Go on. Doomstar's got to go. You can sit right there. The Doomstar wants to play. Go on, go get him. All right, the biggest challenge for the Doomstar yet. Multiple battleships, star bases, a giant Bullrathi fleet. Can the Doomstar take it out? Let's give it a bash. Go! Murder everything. Doomstar's not very mobile, as you can probably tell. It doesn't need to be. Get him. Get him! Is anything gonna get anywhere close to this horrific beast? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Oh god, they're in range of the Mauler devices. They are totally screwed. The shields! They're actually going down. Nope. You can't touch the Doomstar. I'm sorry. That would be very expensive to replace, so I'm kind of glad they didn't. There you go. Master of Orion, ladies and gentlemen. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there. And I'll see you next time.